Um, okay, we're having a little bit of technical trouble with Brian and Joe, so I'm going to connect them up real quick, and then we're going to get started. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our next episode in our emerging technology series. Today, we're going to talk about accelerating and improving your software development lifecycle with artificial intelligence. We have some experts with us today. So I'm just going to start off with Jet Hollister, who is one of our artificial intelligence subject matter experts. We have Zach Curtis, who is one of our artificial intelligence solutions architects. And presumably we have Brian Smitches, who's going to show us one of the new AI development platforms called Windsurf today. So he's a solutions architect that has worked with us for quite a while. I am Paul Williams, Vice President of Solutions for Cognac Government Services. I'll be hosting the webinar today. And just a couple of things for housekeeping. Please turn off your cameras and turn off your mics unless you're a part of the panel until we get to the point where we're having questions. If you have questions along the way, just post them to the chat. We'll get to them in the end. We do want this to be very interactive, but we do have some presentation style content to get through up front. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jet to talk about an intro to AI.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jet. As Paul mentioned, I'm an AI ML subject matter expert with Cognac. And before we get into the software use of AI, I just kind of want to give a little bit of a crash course on like what are AI agents. Brian and Zach are going to talk about AI agents. How are those different than LLMs like ChatGPT, and what are the things in between? So it's a very high level. I've broken into 3 levels here. First, basic level, you have the LLMs like ChatGPT. You take an input prompt, it returns you an answer. It's single turn reasoning, limited to its own internal knowledge, and it's great at isolated language tasks. One step above that, you have what I'd call like an AI workflow. And so think of like chaining together multiple LLMs or tools together, using them for structured processes like document review or ticket creation, and step-by-step human-made, human orchestrated. And then you have the next level is these sort of AI agents. And the key there is that they're autonomously deciding what to do next. They're dynamic, they can act like assistants, they can do tasks that aren't necessarily hard-coded, and you can think of them as like being able to do multiple AI workflows without having to hard code each one of them. And I'm just going to walk you through what that looks like at a basic level. And so large language models, as most of us have seen, you have your input, which is just a basic prompt, like, can you draft an email to Sarah to reschedule our meeting? And you have an output of your email. It's pretty simple. It doesn't require much context, and it's just a pretty basic task that it can do. But if you get to a task like draft an email to the sales team that highlights our top 3 performing products and regions, it's already going to fail because it doesn't have that context of your system. It doesn't know your sales data. It doesn't have access to that. And so here it would return some sort of hallucination because it doesn't actually have that data. And so this is like the first step where AI workflows come in. And so what you do here is you can provide that LLM with an ability to say, query your sales data or query your Outlook emails to get that context. And a human would be putting in those tool sets that it would call. And so in that same email scenario of drafting an email to the sales team, in our AI workflow, we provide it access to say we have it in SharePoint. And so when it gets that request, it makes a query to the sales data in SharePoint, and then it can actually return an accurate prompt or a response with that sales data because it's been given that context via hard-coded tools. Let's say with that same AI workflow, if we wanted to be like, oh, actually just send the email. These responses are really good. Let's just go ahead and send the email to our sales team. Again, it would search, but it doesn't have that tool unless we manually hard code it into the workflow, and so that would fail. And so that's kind of where the AI agents come in here, is instead of hard coding specific things that are workflows that are done every time, you provide these LLMs tools, and based on the task, it reasons and decides what to do, what tools to use for that given task. And so back to that same send an email request. Instead here of a sales data workflow, we have a sales data AI agent. And so it gets that request in. The first thing it does is based on that request, it's like, okay, I need to query the sales data. And once it queries the sales data, it drafts the email, and then it uses the Outlook integration to send that email. And email has been sent. And that specific workflow isn't hard coded, but the tools required to complete that workflow are all provided to the agent. And so in this specific scenario, it calls two separate tools, as well as that same LLM ChatGPT based background. And then another example is, let's say with that same agent, we want to do a separate task, like update our Q4 sales Excel sheet to reflect recent pricing changes. Again, the same agent, different request, might, for example, in this toy scenario, search SharePoint sales data, and then it would pull pricing updates, and then it would use an Excel integration to actually go in and just update that Q4 spreadsheet. And again, same data agent with the same bucket of tools that we provided it, the same integrations, but it can do a much wider range of tasks and workflows dynamically based on what is needed. And you don't have to go in and hard code all of these specific workflows for, kind of small different tasks, but they stack up. And so that's just a very quick primer on what we mean from large language models to AI workflows to AI agents. And Zach and Brian are going to talk more about how this comes into play within the software development lifecycle.
Thanks. Before we move on, a couple questions for you. The first one is, how mature are agents right now? So
Yeah,
are they in wide use at this time?
yeah. Agents are on I would say the cutting edge or even bleeding edge of this. There's a lot of work being done in this area. They aren't always reliable, but they are in certain scenarios, especially like software development, where that human is in the loop. They're quite sophisticated. With agents, I think the good use of them is keeping that human in the loop for now as they get better at like calling the right tools in the right scenarios. But for like mission critical things, workflows are more reliable, definitely.
Okay, cool. What about AI workflows? What are some of the platforms that you would use to do that?
Yeah, there are a host of applications that help you build these with like drag and drop tools, but also you can just build your own with Outlook integrations, Microsoft Office integrations. So depending on your level of um, customization needed, there's off-the-shelf solutions, but there's also you can just connect to APIs and the services you use.
Okay. Exciting times. Everything's
Yeah.
moving fast. Okay, so you were teeing up Zach, so I'll be quiet now, and Zach, if you want to jump in.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, just kind of talking through the evolution of AI and programming, right? Because it's here and it's kind of the future as we move forward. So pre-2022, code was largely written by hand, completely laborious manual process, right? Very time consuming, very expensive. With the limited tools for solving problems, right? So it's common for developers to utilize Google and Stack Overflow, maybe ask a peer for advice on problems that they're running into, and then ChatGPT was released, right? And that became more useful because it understands all the programming languages that are available in what we're using. But it doesn't necessarily know what problem we're solving. It can just kind of answer more generic questions or maybe convert code for us. But from that, we were able to utilize co-pilots, right? So those are agents that are, or excuse me, not agents, but chatbots that are embedded within the development environment. And they're more kind of a Q&A, at your fingertips for a developer, right? So you run into a problem, you can maybe highlight some code and ask it what's wrong with this. But really, again, not extremely useful, might speed the development process up a little bit and provide the developer some insight, but it's not really a fundamental shift in the way that software is written, right? We're still back at that kind of manual with additional tools that speed us up. Now we have agents available to us, and this is where things get really exciting because just like what Jet was talking about with the workflows, these agents can perform multiple tasks and have much stronger reasoning abilities within them. And so, as a developer, regardless of the technology or what you're trying to accomplish, it has a full context of your solution, right? So we can feed that context into that model so that it understands at multiple levels exactly what it is that we're trying to do, whether that's a web application or infrastructure as code or whatever. It's really more of a collaborative environment. So if you want to go to the next slide, Jet. It's really like having a competent paired programmer, right? So at any given time, you have the ability to talk to this AI chatbot that can potentially write code for you. It can simply just be a question and answer like before, but it has the full solution in mind. It's extremely powerful and it's highly collaborative, and it is a fundamental shift in the way we write software because we're no longer thinking about the lines of code that need to be written, but rather thinking about the business problem that we're trying to solve, or the feature that we're trying to release, or the security gap that we're trying to close, and things of that nature. So what's great about this is they're not mutually exclusive, so I really don't need to choose between one methodology or another. They kind of live harmoniously together currently, and I think we'll see that in a demo here shortly from Brian. And just some examples of some things that have really sped it up just for me, right? So I was stuck on a UI issue recently. The layout was shifting in a way I couldn't figure out for many days. I was able to actually take a screenshot and mark up on that screenshot where the layout was shifting when I was trying to perform some action, right? So I can feed that back in my development environment. Now the bot has the full understanding of my solution, all my code base, as well as a marked up screenshot of what's wrong. It completely rewrote it and fixed all of the problems that I was having with those layouts. Another recent endeavor we had was had the need to release a set of AI tools for a customer, and we only had a couple days to do it. I was using a cloud provider that I'm unfamiliar with and haven't really used infrastructure as code with that provider. My estimation, if I was doing that by hand, it probably would have taken me about 3 to 4 weeks. And I was able to have that in production within 4 days. So massive gains in efficiency and the ability to get things out. And it's also probably a higher quality than and less human error prone than what it would have been without that. And last thing that I love about it personally is code documentation, right? Us developers don't like to write a lot of documentation about what our code does or how to get it spun up or things like that, right? And so you can use these bots within your development environment to actually fully generate documentation, build READMEs, even generate architectural diagrams based on the infrastructure or the code base that it's working with. So pretty exciting times, and I think it's going to absolutely change the way that software development has been done and moving forward.
So Zach, when's the last time you used Stack Overflow?
It's been a while. Every once in a while, I find myself just old habits, right? We go to Google and Stack Overflow is that first thing. One thing I worry about is that as people progressively stop using it because they're using AI models, though that's a resource that's not really going to be as useful or as updated, right? So if you're using a private model, that information in the solution is not necessarily being fed back into the model. And so it's more secure and private that way, but then you don't have the ability to learn from other people's solutions that they found in the past. So
yeah, it's a good point. It'll be interesting to see how the quality of AI troubleshooting, software troubleshooting progresses in the near future. How many, random question for you, how many developers as a percentage do you think are using some sort of AI for their development?
my guess is with co-pilots and the more agentic style, it's probably, I would say, the vast majority. A lot of the tooling that we use for software development is just built into it now. Like Amazon Q or GitHub has Copilot. They're just kind of there whether you want them to be or not, quite frankly, and they're usually pretty useful, but not always. But my guess is probably the majority of developers are using it in some form or another at this point.
Yeah, if they're not using a Copilot, they're using some type of chat, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yep,
So.
yep. And I've certainly seen evidence of people using ChatGPT and again, it doesn't have the full context of your code base, and so it's obvious like that was written by AI, and it may or may not necessarily be what you're actually looking for. So
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Zach. Now we're going to move on to a demonstration. Brian Smith.
Well, I think we have to go through 2 slides really fast before we start the demo.
Okay. So Brian's going to tee us up for that.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so just to continue the conversation that Zach was discussing with the idea that there are copilots, which were good at giving single suggestions, to then, as systems became more powerful and capable, we got these autonomous agentic operations, just the same way that Jet was talking about. And so what's interesting is that as we built the autonomous systems, Windsurf took an intentional approach to say, we actually want to go backwards in this kind of autonomous approach and say people still need to be involved. And so we actually called it flows, the idea being that sometimes the human is leading the operation, sometimes the AI is leading the operation, but regardless, they're in tandem together. And so the collaborative agent here will actually do a demo of it, but it has context over not just what models are available, not just what your code base is, not just what tools it has access to, but also what the human has done in their application. So keeping a ledger of that history of events allows the AI to derive that trajectory and figure out what the next probable intent is to make quality suggestions. So in the next slide, I'll give you an overview of our product, and then we can go into a demo. So at the very top here, you'll see some like labels talking about normal tasks that software developers do. They're modernizing their code, they're documenting their code, writing unit tests, creating new code, just explaining and trying to think through net new operations they want to do on their code base. And the first layer of this is then where do they do that work? And so the where is in these applications. You'll hear a term called an IDE, an integrated development environment, and that's where a lot of the developers' lives live. It's in this place where they're writing and debugging and testing their code local to the machine. And so I won't have time to go through the full slide, but I do want to talk about just the Windsurf editor and the Windsurf plugins. The Windsurf editor is a fork of Visual Studio Code, a very popular IDE that is now, we had to fork it to add in and layer in a lot of our AI capabilities across the whole IDE. The Windsurf plugins are where we bring the AI capabilities to third-party editors, and our best supported suite of editors will be those delivered by JetBrains. So if you think about like IntelliJ, there's a lot of Java developers who love their IntelliJ editor. We are bringing our agentic capabilities into those editors as well via a plugin. So now that we know what their developers are doing and where they're doing it, how is the AI helping is the next question. And that's through these capabilities that I'll give you a brief demo of today. Tab is going to be our passive modality. It's going to be your pair programmer that's just going to passively be invoked without you realizing it to give suggestions on autocomplete where your cursor is, super complete, which is filling in code where your cursor is not, and tab to jump, which is moving your cursor around your code base. And there's another feature called tab to import that I won't have time to demo today. But that's a really supplemental behavior for an AI to help keep a developer in the flow because it reduces that friction in the developer completing their work stream and their task. Another capability that I do want to highlight is called Cascade. And Cascade is the second feature we offer, which is basically your collaborative agentic assistant. And you'll see this, it's basically the evolution of a chatbot, but it has a lot more features and a lot more capabilities. And so the engines under the hood power all this, but I think that that's a little bit too detailed for now. And for the sake of time, I'm going to go into the demo to show you both Tab and Cascade against a code base inside of the Windsurf editor. So let me take over the screen share. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. So this is the Windsurf editor, again, a fork of Visual Studio Code. So you'll note that it probably looks very familiar if you have used Visual Studio Code before. Over here on the left is where your file Explorer is. So things that you might need to navigate to be able to work with your code base. Down at the bottom is your terminal. Over on the right-hand side is where Cascade is actually accessed. This is your collaborative agentic assistant. The idea of agentic assistant just means it has access to tools to trigger operations, and it can do multiple steps as it's thinking through its workflow, how it wants to help you. So one common use case we see AI assistants helping is with onboarding to new code bases. So imagine I'm a new software developer and I'm looking at this code base. I have no idea what's going on. I'm looking at this library demo. I then have to go and contextualize, all the files that are in this code base. For example, just this source directory, if I start to mention it, you'll see that the source directory has 325 files. Now that's going to be a very large, cumbersome cognitive load for me as a software developer to be able to contextualize all of this. What is the directory structure? What are the contents of these files? So I can start to work with my collaborative assistant to just ask very natural, plain English questions about my code base, such as what is going on in my code base? Just by asking this very simple, direct question, the AI assistant is going to start to invoke tools. So this little window right here is an analysis tool that it has access to. It's going to look specifically at this directory, and then it's going to analyze another directory that is a subdirectory inside of this project that is this main directory we have opened up here. It will start to give you some analysis on the code base. It will tell you what's going on. I see it's a Java-based library management system. Here's what I see. Here's some build configurations. And what's fascinating about working with this is that I can actually start to work through this chat interface to navigate through my code base. So here you'll see a hyperlink that's opening up a Docker file. And so I can actually open this file not just from the hierarchical file explorer, but also from the semantic conversation that is what the AI assistant is helping me contextualize. So this is just one use case, which would be onboarding and having that collaborative assistant always there ready to answer your questions. I can do deep dives into specific directories or specific files, highlight certain things and send it to the chat editor and get a lot of follow-up questions answered there, especially with the at mention where you put the ampersand symbol and actually go down into the specific chunk of code that you're wanting to use as context. Now what I'll do is I'll pivot to another demo that I have, which is working with unit tests. Another thing that developers have to do a lot of the time is just generating unit tests to make sure their code works as expected on the base cases. So in this code base right here, you'll see that there are some test files that are written in JavaScript. We do support 70+ languages, so ignore the fact that it is JavaScript. But just for this demo purposes, that's what we will be using. And so I can simply ask my agentic assistant, run the jest tests in this project. And running test scripts is something that is actually the step after you generate your unit tests, right? At this point in time, we do have support, of course, for generating unit tests, but that's table stakes for most AI coding companions. To be able to look at implementation of files and say, what are the base cases we want to make sure work and what are the expected inputs and outputs? What's fascinating about using a collaborative agentic assistant is that it has access to do things like running terminal commands. So what you'll notice is as I accept this command, that will actually run down here in the terminal. And so when I click that, it executes a terminal script, runs through the command line tool, and then reads the output from the computer language. And so I can tell you from working with Jess before that, okay, this is very good, only one test failed. Now I need to go triage why that one test has failed. But similarly, because the AI has context over what happened in that test invocation from the terminal, it can say, hey, here's what I've noticed. There's a failing test in this file. Here's my rationale of it. Do you want me to go fix the test case to match the correct weighted behavior? I'm not quite ready for it to make that assessment. I can just say, do further research to ensure this logic is sound, then propose the change. Again, going back to the what are flows. Sometimes the developer is leading, sometimes the AI is leading, and we want to allow software developers to unlock a higher form of software development, where they're thinking and guiding, if it's their pair programmer, how it can work with these tools. At the end of the day, this is just a tool to enable developers to do their jobs. So here you'll see it's analyzing the actual code base to say, okay, I'm looking at this part of the code, which is your test. I'm comparing it to your implementation. I did not have to do anything very burdensome to ask that prompt. I just asked it in natural English. And then it says, here is my suggestion. Now I'm going to make the proposed change. Would you like to review it? And so as a developer, my job is to make sure, yes, the AI is correct. It did not hallucinate. I agree with what your rationale is. Let me accept this suggested change. And now what is the logical next step? Let's run the test again. Let's see if it worked. And it's already got me in that next suggested state. Again, keeping the developer in the flow. So I'll run this command, and you'll see just like that, all the tests have been fixed. And when it comes to working with your collaborative assistant, you're really unlocking a new sort of efficiency to be able to not just work with new code bases, not just ask questions, but also actually execute your tasks that you're trying to complete inside of your IDE. And this is just working with Cascade, which is the chat-based assistant that is actively invoked. What a lot of software engineers love about working with Windsurf is even the passive experience. And so I want to close out with a demo on our passive experience. And so right here, what you'll see if you are familiar with Python code is this is just a simple Flask server that is receiving data from a front-end form. And that front-end form is basically collecting contact information. Imagine you go to a website and you're saying, let me give you contact us. I'll give you my name, my email, and I'm going to leave a message. And as a person who has received a user requirement from my product manager, I may hear, oh, I actually need to start collecting phone numbers as well. So if I'm working into just generating this code, the next step I would need to do is I'll just add a new line in here. And I'll say, okay, I want to start to add a new phone into the contact. So let me see, it's proposing timestamp as the next suggestion. I think that's a decent suggestion, but actually let me start to type in phone, right? And so it'll start to autocomplete. There's that suggestion. It's going to continue to autocomplete with these suggestions. And what's interesting about Windsurf tab is it's not just auto-completing where your cursor is. It's actually proposing the next logical place for your cursor to move. So my cursor is where this red highlight jumping cursor is, but there's a tab to jump suggestion down here. It's saying, would you like to move your cursor down to line 26? Because that's where I think you probably want to go next. And yes, I do. And now it's actually giving the next validation to make sure that phone is required. And if not, throw a 400 error. So I can tab to complete there as well. And so this again keeps the developer in the flow where your collaborative assistant is making suggestions passively invoked to make sure that you are getting that value out of it. And similarly, if I go ahead and save this and open up the front-end equivalent of that form in the same workspace, I can do the next logical thing, which is updating the contact form data. So naturally here, I'm going to receive a phone. I actually want it to have this be required. And so then the next thing is I'll come down here and we have the autocomplete. You'll see the tab to jump offer another suggestion. It's suggesting we start to put phone into the set form data, and it suggests we jump up here, we start to sanitize the phone data. And so again, just working with all of these normal progressions that developers have to do to explicitly state the imperative programming across all these different surfaces is where this tab to jump and autocomplete starts to really add a lot of value. So with that, I think I'll stop the demo. We encourage everyone to kind of use the product out of the box, but there are a lot of things that I did not cover. Things like customizations that are where, when you work with people who have expertise working with AI developer tools, you can see how doing things like giving custom instructions to the AI or defining custom workflows that you commonly work with the AI to do can bring a lot of really significant value to your developer work streams in their SDLC.
Brian, this is a great demo. I've got a, can I ask you a couple of questions?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so I guess the first one might be more of an observation. So I think this would be great as far as productivity goes. It seems like it would really improve the accuracy of what people are doing as well as your productivity, so you can write better code faster is what I'm seeing. But I mean, it doesn't look like the fear that I have heard from a lot of developers that coders won't be needed anymore is going to become true, right? It sounds like they're going to be engaged, but their life's a lot better. We'll be able to produce better quality code faster. What is your take on that?
I 100% agree. Where AI is today in terms of how autonomous is this system, we believe that it is more of a flow-based system where the developer is in the loop, again, guiding the AI, reviewing everything. This surface plane being in the integrated development environment has very low stakes if the AI makes a false suggestion. And so if we actually have a false acceptance that that was a bad suggestion, it will be caught in our downstream software development processes, such as a code review during a pull request. And so in a security scanning tool that's downstream in your release pipeline, starting at the leftmost point of this SDLC is where AI has the most value today in augmenting real developers as they're doing their jobs. And so I truly do not think that this reduces the amount of developers we will need. It actually increases the thesis that we should be investing in people who are building items of value, because now the actual value realization has increased because of the new productivity gains and the higher form of software development that has been unlocked. And we're enabling people to start to do their jobs and become 10x developers with this tool.
Yeah. What have you seen as far as the burden on, like, a lot of times lead developers are overtaxed with keeping their junior developers moving. What have you seen from that aspect?
Yeah, I definitely have seen, we did not get to touch on it much in this call, but rules and workflows being things that you can have your team lead actually commit into your code base of how are we going to work with the AI to provide a consistent delivery expertise, where if we have a common workflow that is, this is how our organization develops software, that burden is reduced from the senior engineer to be able to onboard the junior engineer to just do a common workflow. Instead, they're defining it in natural English. Additionally, when it comes to junior developers feeling like I don't understand this code base, I want to ask a question and I want to follow up. I'm not burdening a senior engineer and cannibalizing their time. Instead, I'm actually using my contextualized, intelligent, collaborative assistant to start to work with me to help the junior engineers upskill themselves even faster. So all in all, this is just an immense gain for the different degrees of expertise, both on the senior level and the junior level in software developers and organizations.
Yeah, let people focus on providing value instead of all the boilerplate stuff. I never did like writing all those getters and setters and stuff like that.
Right.
Well, and the thing is too, you can, using those rules, you can really implement your organization's stylistic rules, right? So that may include things like security best practices and accessibility best practices. Like you can include those in those rules and just say, as an organization, like this is the way we want the software to be written to these standards. And so that ensures that those junior developers are meeting those standards. Instead of like the old days, Paul, we used to get a document that had all the rules for that, right? Like this is the style we write in. This is, tabs and spaces and functions and whatever. You can just put those in there in those rules and just know like they're always going to come out that way. And one other comment I had real quick, Brian, when you were showing the unit test demo, when I was deploying those AI tools, I got the infrastructure as code all set up and deployed, and I had a runtime error, and it was in an Azure environment. I haven't worked with Azure for a very long time, and so I'm not as familiar with their CLI. I pasted the error I was getting into Cascade there, and it opened a Cascade terminal and said, hey, let's go look at your environment, right? So run this command. And I was able just to keep running the commands it suggested. And because it has an understanding of what the inputs and outputs are, it's like a troubleshooting buddy, but it's an Azure expert, right? So this thing's sitting here guiding me through every one of those commands. I certainly could have figured it out, but I might have spent 5 to 10 minutes per command, and there maybe is a dozen of them. That saved hours of my life just having it walk me through the troubleshooting steps for that particular product.
Yeah, and that's the power of collaborating both these general purpose pre-trained models that have a lot of that context of training data of how to work with these systems that people might not have as much expertise with, along with what is customized from, your contextual code base that you're working on. And so certainly we are aiming at helping the enterprise. That's kind of our position of where we have enterprise grade security. And also I know that for the audience that you specifically work with, I want to reiterate that we do have a FedRAMP High SaaS solution. And so when it comes to, I guess, a short call to action, I would love to suggest that anyone who's interested in seeing how you can bring a tool of this nature or the expertise of a Cognac Government Services to see how we can bring this value to our specific software development practices, I think that's a very realistic next step and outcome for anyone in the room who's interested.
Yeah, so Brian, that was good timing. I don't know if you saw the chat or not, but we had a few people asking about how can we get this in to the government environment. But you did just say it's FedRAMP high, so it can go up to it can go into most government environments. And don't you have an option for being able to deploy non-SaaS as well?
So we have essentially three main deployment modes. The deployment mode number one is just going to be our traditional enterprise SaaS. And this is zero data retention by design, and by default. So essentially, whenever you make a subscription here, we're not retaining your data, we don't log your data, we're not training on your data, and that's a really important security paradigm for just enterprises in general. Now, what that did is it made it very easy to go and take the same kind of architecture and deploy. We don't have all the same feature sets available, but deploy it in a new FedRAMP SaaS environment. So that is hosted with Palantir FedStart and AWS GovCloud. And so we can talk through some details there. But because it is IL5 compliant, there's a lot of DoD use cases where they can just use that version of the SaaS. And the third deployment mode being hybrid is a detail that I can go into further detail on another call, but that's specifically basically in addition to our normal enterprise SaaS, where we introduce a data layer that resides on the customer servers. And the self-hosted, which is what you were alluding to, can you use it in a non-SaaS form? We no longer support that, but we did kind of start out with trying to keep enterprise security in mind. How can we meet the customers where they are? And so we originally offered a self-hosted model, but it's not sustainable anymore. So now we're emphasizing this zero data retention SaaS and this FedRAMP high SaaS as the way that we can aggregate demand and have really strong security architecture under the hood to deliver services there.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to go to another question, just real quick. I want to get back to the question was on AI agents versus machine learning from Jonathan Farb. That was directed towards you, Jet. So if you want to,
Yeah, I'm going to pull up.
Quick.
It's a great question. I'm going to pull up actually a slide that I had in the deck that I skipped past. And it's a great question. It's hard because they're two sides of the same coin, right? Like LLMs and AI agents are based on machine learning, but the way I like to think of them is you're separating them based on capabilities and use cases they work for. And so when you think of traditional ML, think of like custom built ML or models for specific use cases, like think numerical prediction, any sort of like numerical structured use cases, demand forecasting, anomaly detection, predictive maintenance, things like that. And LLMs, like of course, were created via machine learning, but they're much more dynamic and less rigid. They can handle a lot of use cases across chatbots, semantic search, content generation, process automation. And of course, AI agents are just an extension of LLMs here. But it's in kind of the use cases that they're able to attack.
And when we say I'm sorry, but when we say traditional ML, we or traditional AI is also referred to, we mean machine learning specifically, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That shifts over time, I think. Jed, it was almost like you were prepared for that question.
It's a great question that a lot of people have. So,
okay. Next question was: has Windsurf been utilized in a healthcare setting? This came from Habib.
So yes, we do have healthcare clients, and so essentially that again back to the enterprise SaaS. When we're looking at the zero data retention, we go through security requirements for teams to be able to say, are we able to use it in this healthcare setting? A lot of what's interesting about working with actual software development is the sensitive data is not what's in the software. It's actually what's in the systems as they're in production. And so when it comes to doing things, especially like developing a UI for an electronic health record system, certainly if you're working with code and you do that inside of a development environment, you can use the Windsurf editor and see how the agentic AI capabilities plus the other embedded AI features augment your developers as they're doing that task of developing the UI.
Hey, Brian,
But
I
we,
haven't tried this yet, but can you, if you have like mock-ups that a designer created in, say, Figma of a design, like I know there's a lot of tools out there that will, convert those using AI to code, sort of on the web. In my opinion, they don't really work that well, or I haven't seen one that works that well. But because like using Windsurf, because it understands images, like could I just put that mock-up and say, hey, I want this to be this page, and
yes.
go build it using my coding standards and make sure that it matches my environment.
Yes, so we've seen there's a lot of people who do what's called vibe coding, which is basically they just have fun working with the AI. And so a very base case for vibe coding or even actually building real UI is just drawing a mock-up on a piece of paper or building it in a Figma design application, taking that image and using it as context for your chat window with Cascade. And so it can use that multimodal input to derive the best output, generating the code in your code base. And then what's interesting about specifically Figma is we've also seen people connect to the Figma system in more of a systematic way using a system called Model Context Protocol. And so Model Context Protocol essentially allows the Windsurf editor to use its agentic assistant to invoke a tool or reach a resource that's in another system outside of the IDE, being, for example, a Figma file. So you can go to Figma, use your API key, pull down that information as context and relay that to the AI model to then use that as context as well. So model context protocol is a common paradigm in addition to just using those multimodal user inputs to generate UIs.
I get automate the
All right,
automation.
Brian, we're getting close to the end, but I want to throw one curveball at you and see if I can
I might
see
call
how
time.
Windsurf will
We'll
handle
see.
this one. So, a large part of our business in federal government work is modernization or refactoring. We win a contract, a previous incumbent company had built a product, and a lot of times what we have to do is come in and understand the product, modernize it to meet new standards, and then deploy it successfully. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that workflow would go with Windsurf? What kind of efficiencies you could get?
Yeah, just at a high level, there are you imagine how you would tackle that task without AI. So what would developers do? They'd go and they'd research the legacy code base. They'd have to understand it. Still, we're not removing the developer from that loop. So we're augmenting the developer to be able to go and do that research as that first phase. Explain the code. We have shortcuts inside of the editor to be able to explain certain pieces of code. If you start to refactor certain pieces, we do have shortcuts even for that. Refactor this chunk of code. I'm trying to remove bugs, things like that. Working with the agentic assistant though to take discrete tasks or build even a workflow that's repeatable. I'm looking at this chunk of code. I want to refactor it into a new language and do it in a new directory. Defining that workflow and having the context of, okay, we're now going to attack this small surface, and then we're going to do this next small surface. And so the AI is then doing suggestions that can be reviewed by the person and not just doing it all in kind of like one autonomous fashion. We're accelerating the process for people to do those jobs and maintain that context. So I would just say, in terms of efficiency gains, just imagine a world where you're not using this and also think about the people who propose autonomous systems. How much do you trust what they're going to output? This is a very trustworthy system because there is a person that is always kind of involved in that process and being accelerated with AI.
I gotcha. Okay, thank you. Um, we've got a couple more questions from the audience. The first one is, have you been able to create a process to automate? He just changed the question. So, have you been able to create a process to automate manual processes such as loading, immunization, update? Um,
I don't entirely understand the question, but I'll speak to just when you're working with your AI assistant and you're trying to define automations in terms of scripts, right, inside of your code base. These are such versatile models under the hood with these frontier-based models that they can just accept your requirements and then execute the tasks. So as long as you're supplying sufficient context of what you're trying to produce as outcome, and there's enough input context from your code base or your user prompt, it will definitely help you with defining scripts for things like automations.
Gotcha. So I apologize. We've run out of time, but we do want to stay on time with these. So the call to action is reach out to us. Reach out to me. Reach out to Brian, Zach, or Jet, and let's talk about how this can help improve your workflow. Sorry, Joni, we didn't get to your question, but we'll follow up with you offline. If anyone else wants to engage, just please reach out, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you.